Okay, I would like to call the meeting
Cultural
to
Institute.
order at 9:04 a.m. There's no
So,
minutes,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
there's no minutes
No.
for this meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, director's report.
All right, thank you. Um, so we'll talk about the election just a little bit later. Update on the 2020 census. The numbers won't come out until September, probably the last week of September. Um, Several things. Number one, it's going to cause a problem possibly with the upcoming election, which means the as you remember, the Board of Aldermen goes down to 14 next year, I believe, and they're going to have to redraw all of the ward based on 14. They won't be given that information. Usually it takes a long time to do that. So that's going to condense the timeline to draw all of the wards, the 14 wards, for the upcoming election, which I guess will be in the spring of 2022. President Biden appointed a new Commerce Secretary, and by doing that, there's going to be other appointments to the census side of that equation. So look for that in the coming 2 or 3, 4 weeks as they begin to look at what the numbers mean in terms of redistricting. Because not only is it, we're worried about our ward map, but this goes to the state first. And so you're going to have redrawing of the House of Representatives and the Senate districts as well. So look for that in the coming weeks. We did have a local election. I'm not quite sure why people were confused because they had been told about this previously. So this is sort of the runoff provision. So the top two candidates will face off in a general election, which will be a month from yesterday. And then, so that's kind of the way that happens. We'll give you an update on board bills. There's basically 3 in the hopper. One is the Crown Act, which is Board Bill 222, which is done by Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, and it's an anti-discrimination bill based on hair. And that means how your hair is worn, if it's in locks or if it's in dreads or if it's in some other style. It really was centered around employment, but we're going to stretch that and use 67119 as an anti-discrimination tactic and have it in housing as well. And also where it really is prevalent is education. And while we're not over the education process, we certainly can gather those claims of discrimination and not only forward them to the St. Louis Public Schools, but also monitor their process and how they go about handling those claims of discrimination. The second is Board Bill 238, which is the anti-discrimination bill, really around processes related to housing. We again will add employment to that context. It's our first really out the box looking at human rights and not just civil rights as they're contained in federal law. So there's some activities that will no longer be allowed in the city as they're anti-discriminatory, and they really have our first stab at a human rights flavor. The third bill, the third set of bills is around the surveillance camera, and it's what I call it. There are 2 board bills. I think one is Board Bill 200 that does not have us in it. It basically sets up a contract between the company and the city. Board Bill 95 has us in it and has us as the overseer, if you will, of claims of surveillance by the particular company and some other provisions in there. I don't know what the status of all of that is. as of yet because of the upcoming election, and perhaps the current mayor may be reluctant to sign on a bill that the new mayor may not like or appreciate or what have you. So I think some of those things around surveillance cameras are up in the air. I want to talk about Continuum of Care, which was a training that we did. We worked with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to set up a training for the shelter operators, those that are funded by the city, around equal access. And you have to go back to 2012, and there was an equal access provision. There was a 2016 equal access provision. Well, a lot of the shelters felt like when the Trump administration got in office and Ben Carson suggested in public that they might rescind those, they felt like it was over with when it really wasn't. So we had HUD come in and do that training on what the shelter access provisions are from 2012 and 2016. And we also talked about what the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency anti-discrimination laws are for the city. It was very well received. I think we're doing some follow-up with the City Department of Homeless Services so that everybody continues in that vein of not discrimination and equal access in our city-funded shelters. Final thing I want to talk about, which leads into the Deputy Director's report, is the budget process. Just remind people, budget process is really creeping up on us quickly here. The initial budget is presented by the Budget Division. It goes to the Board of Estimate and Apportion for, I will say, approval or tentative approval. It goes then to Ways and Means, Committee of the Board of Aldermen for hearings and markup. And then once the full board approves the budget, it goes back to ENA for final approval for the city. 2 points of that, and then if Alderwoman Ingracia wants to jump in, I appreciate that. Budget must be balanced, and I believe it must be passed by June 30th. So you have, on top of the budget process, a change in administration. But we've done it before, and we've managed, and so we will get to this or get through it. So that is, that's my report. If there's any questions, I would take them now. If not, I welcome the Deputy Director's report.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm
James?
Are there any questions?
I'm trying to use my space bar to unmute myself, but it didn't seem to be working. Just a question, and maybe for Christine, in terms of discrimination, I mean, we could talk about all of these different things with hair, like I'm blessed with a lot, but it's gray. Some people aren't, whatever, but it seems to me it's all about appearance. And if we are going to say, okay, you can't discriminate based on hair or eye color or clothing that you're wearing or the style of your glasses or whatever, is there such a way to define something that you really just can't discriminate against someone's appearance? Or is that too general?
I think that's, yeah, probably too general, but I mean, I get where you're coming from. I guess there are a number of other ways to discriminate. I think this one is of particular importance because we know that especially Black and brown people, you've seen it in the news, have been told that they can't show up to school a certain way or show up to a job a certain way. So this is allowing protection at that level. But I guess it would be something worth exploring. And I think probably an attorney would be a smart person with whom to consult, because that's just not my I don't have a level of expertise with something like that. But I do think it's worth a conversation.
Well, you have a board attorney for the Board of Aldermen, and something that would read in such a way that's just not so general that anyone can just file a grievance just because, well, they didn't like the cut of the collar on my shirt. But somehow there should be a way about that.
Well, just remember, the basis is discrimination. So are you treating me different based on how I choose to wear my hair versus someone else? And what that looks like is, remember the two young men who were wrestling, and the referee said, you have to cut your locks in order to wrestle. Now, there was no provision in law for that, and nobody else, you know, we're adults here. No one else, no one white was told to shave, not shave, but to cut their hair. This particular young man was told to cut his hair, even though there was no provision in law for it. And he could have done other things to put his hair up if it was going to be a problem. So but you look around the country in a wide variety of cities, and where this really resides in, you can't come into class unless you cut your hair, unless you wear your hair a certain way. And so both cities and I believe the state of California have instituted laws that are somewhat specific. And I will send you the Crown Act ordinance. There also is State Representative Lakeisha Bosley has also introduced it on a state level, which I believe has passed the House, or maybe in the final stages of the House. So there are some particulars around the discrimination based on how someone wears their hair.
Yeah, and James, appearance is too broad. If you said you appear to be, I mean, a lawyer could use that wordsmith appearance in general. I think so. I think it has to have some specificity to protect everyone. But I absolutely agree. I've seen some strange things in schools where some things are allowed and other things are not, and it's just bizarre.
James, in the corporate space, everyone hear me clearly?
I can't hear him.
You can't hear me?
Barely.
Yeah, uh,
You're muffled.
Garbled.
okay. I'll probably have to log into my other
Oh, that's
Oh,
good.
you're fine now.
computer. Oh, I am? Okay. But in the corporate space, on a biannual basis, we have to take cultural awareness training. And they list what they consider microaggressions that will pervade in an environment. And for two different people, two diverse people to be in a workplace, and possibly that person has seniority, or one of them does, and continues to ask the person who works for them, can't you do something about your hair? Or can't you do something about the way your physical appearance? That is a microaggression. And then it lends itself to direct discrimination.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think that, as everyone has said, to generalize that would be doing that whole effort a disservice. It needs that kind of specificity around it. Otherwise, it becomes just a homogeneous, well, I feel this way about my look, or you feel that way about your look. We have to really make sure we're targeting.
I will, thank you, Charles. I will get the both the city board bill as well as the state board bill out to you all by this afternoon. Are there any other questions? Denise?
Okay, good morning again. I'll
Hey.
start out. Well, good morning. I'll start out about our statistics. In January, we closed 2 housing cases. In February, we closed 1. Our current inventory is 29 cases, 4 employment, 22 housing, and 3 public accommodation. While that number kind of sounds small, it really is extremely large considering we only have 1 investigator. I have been doing investigations part-time, which really puts the agency a disservice because I cannot review it at my own investigations. So there's no two layers typically where I would review and then Charles would be the second set of eyes. So Robert is really bombarded. And I don't know what's going on with the climate, but our housing cases are just tripling. Yesterday, we had like 4 calls regarding that people believe they're being discriminated. And it's not so much of them being evicted, it's just that landlords are not making repairs or owners are requesting different things from different tenants. So I just wanted to kind of share that information with you guys. So that would lead me to talk about the budget. As Charles says, these 3 board bills that would be coming to CREA would definitely impact how we do business if without additional bodies in here. So one of the main things that I've requested from the budget division is 2 FTEs. One of them would be a full-time investigator and another clerk typist too, which would work with the surveillance program because we would have to gather a whole lot of data. And as Charles and I have discussed, it's hard to do what we do with just one investigator. So we try to make our plea across the street regarding the budget that they have to give us another body over here. And so that's where we're at with the budget. So we haven't heard anything. I haven't received any questions from our budget analyst, except for the board bill 238, which she wanted an explanation, which expands our services. But once again, if you expand services, you've got to give the resources to do that. So this leads me to the third thing that I will talk about this morning. And you can really go on EEOC's website, but they just recently published their 2020 report on their statistics. And I thought the main thing that I wanted to kind of share with you guys is retaliation is the #1 thing. It's no longer disability, and I found that really different. So they received more retaliation complaints, and in FY20, that was the main thing. It spelled out 57,000 or 55% of all their cases. So retaliation and then disability, race, sex, age, national origin, and color, religion, and equal pay. So it's kind of taken a different turn, but they also stress the importance of they've done more filing and have more resolutions, or maybe I should say settlements and conciliations. So that's a good thing, I guess, because sometimes when we look at settlements and conciliations, you don't know if the person has actually done something and they would go ahead and pay. So you don't really get the full gist of what happened with the case. So on that note, that's about all I have to share. The budget thing is definitely a top priority with our agency. And so just keep your fingers crossed that we get what we requested in the budget year.
I want to go back.
Do you have any?
I want to go back for a minute to what Denise said. So just remember, there was possibly an original charge of something. And then once EEOC, or it could be CREA, sent a letter out saying this person believes they've been the victim of discrimination, then that's the retaliation that takes place after that. And so or it could have been just a situation in the office where somebody said I was going to an HR director or a personnel director, and then they were retaliated against. But to have 55.8% of all charges that were filed being retaliation says 2 things. One, I think HR directors, personnel directors are not doing an appropriate job of informing those who are alleged to have perpetrated a discrimination of what their rights and responsibilities are. And number 2, I think that having disability still literally be the #1 charge of discrimination other than retaliation. still says a lot about our society in general. And we do need to do a much better job of informing a wide variety of people, but especially HR directors and department managers around discrimination as it relates probably to employment more than anything else. So,
Charles, may I add something to that?
I'm sorry.
I say, this is David. May I add something to that?
Yes, please.
The fact that, I mean, all of those retaliation cases, as you're saying, may have come from a variety of reasons. Might be a race case, might be a disability case, et cetera. So it's hard to sort the retaliation out from the kinds of cases that underlie it. And the second thing is that plaintiffs' lawyers are well aware of how hard it is to win a direct discrimination case, but retaliation is often much more obvious. So it doesn't surprise me very much that the prevalence of cases that are moving forward are, in many of them are retaliation cases. It makes sense.
James?
Denise, I wanted to ask you, are you seeing retaliation cases regarding housing and tenant-landlord relationships?
Currently, I think we have 3. And it's based upon retaliation. But they're alleging, because they filed with us, that the housing provider is retaliating against. One case in particular, I had to go no cause because by the time they got the retaliation charge, they had not received the determination. So, I mean, they had not received the other charge. So a person can't retaliate without knowing that they're retaliating. So I'm not seeing obvious retaliation. I'm just seeing kind of subtle retaliation. So
I can tell you sort of how it works in with housing, and it goes on, and this has been the case for a long time. It's just not been labeled or branded retaliation, but what ends up happening is a tenant's dissatisfied with the landlord, particularly in terms of request for maintenance or responsiveness or whatever. And then, so the tenant then withholds rent. Then the landlord demands the money while the tenant says, well, you haven't fixed anything. Then the landlord files for eviction based on non-payment. Then the tenant reports the landlord to city housing and has an inspection, and then he gets cited for that. And it just goes back and forth and gets uglier until the person leaves and both sides are unhappy. And I see that quite a bit. I'm not saying that's my personal case, although I do have an issue right now with one. But that's happened before, and I'm sure it happens to a lot of people. I'm just surprised they're not bringing it to us.
well, and we also have one particular case where this tenant complained a lot. She wanted this fixed, she wanted that fixed.
Yeah.
It ended up the property was damaged by a third party. A car hit the building. The landlord used that as a reason to terminate her tenancy. And he said, okay, I'm just gonna, because he's gonna say, I'm not gonna make the building habitable, but there's 3 other tenants that live there. But her unit, so all of a sudden he wants to terminate her tenancy. And so now, she has 2 children and he gave her like 30-day notice. He has other property. He would not move her to other property. And he's even blocked her number because he says he's tired of hearing her complaints. So, so that's one way that it looks like retaliation to me, but the investigation is still ongoing.
Yeah, well, just one more comment, and not to elaborate or take too much time with that, but that real issue there is that landlord is not treating everyone fairly and equally.
Exactly.
If that in fact was the case, and I know when that happens, because I've had vehicles hit my buildings. And the first thing the inspection division does, they send out somebody, see if it's structurally sound and either condemn it or cite it for repair or say, oh, it's okay. But he'd have to condemn the whole building for occupancy and tell everyone he has to leave, or can't use that as a reason against that one, just one of the 4 tenants. I'm done. Sorry to prolong the meeting.
James, the other thing is we still see a lot of inquiries versus cases. And I think that's part of the thought process is, if I go ahead and file this, what's going to happen? And that's probably true in both employment and housing. So I think the retaliation number is interesting because it meant people really went ahead and followed through. Here, I think you know, this is such a small city. People know each other. Yeah, I just want to keep my job. I just want to keep my housing. Forget it. I'm not going to follow through
Not
on
worth
the claim of discrimination. Yeah. Are there any additional questions for Denise? If not, I want to introduce Elizabeth Risch. Did I hear yes? Oh, so Elizabeth Risch is director?
Deputy.
I'm the assistant director.
Assistant director of Equal Housing Opportunity Council, and she is co-chair, if I said that right, of the Equal Housing and Community Reinvestment Alliance. They do incredible work. We sit with that body. They do incredible work around the issue of Community Reinvestment Act on a local level, and when banks and financial institutions, or maybe just banks, are involved in mergers and agreements and whatever they call them now. So with that, I will give the platform to Elizabeth Risch.
Thank you. Good morning, all. It's great to be with you on your this meeting. Charles asked me to speak briefly about our work as our CREA coalition, so the St. Louis Equal Housing and Community Reinvestment Alliance, to talk a little bit about our Community Reinvestment Act advocacy, as well as a report that we released at the end of 2020 about changes in the reinvestment field in St. Louis. So I have a few slides that I'm going to share. I can do this. So great, hopefully you can all see these. CREA is a coalition of community organizations, nonprofits based in the St. Louis region. Our mission is to increase investment in low-income communities, regardless of race, and in minority communities, regardless of income. And we do that by ensuring that banks are meeting their obligations under the CRA and fair lending laws. So CREA has been a great member of CREA for the last, I don't know how many years, but we have a pretty broad range of organizations and community groups that are part of our coalition. It really speaks to organizations, community stakeholders that are interested in holding banks accountable to what they're doing in our community, and making sure that all communities, especially low-income communities and communities of color, are provided with a fair level of bank services, investment, and lending. So the Community Reinvestment Act, hopefully this is a refresher for you all, but the CRA is a federal law that was passed in 1977. It's intended to encourage banks to meet the credit needs of the communities in which they operate, particularly low and moderate income communities, and to do that with safety and soundness. So originally the CRA was passed to address redlining, where banks and other financial institutions were drawing literal red lines around communities of color and denying them the same level of access to loans, to home insurance, as white communities.
Elizabeth, try to reboot because we're getting a black screen.
Oh, shoot. Okay, let me stop this.
Elizabeth, your screen sharing is working, but it's just a blank image.
Okay. Thanks for cutting in. I don't see the chat when I'm,
Yeah.
is that better?
I still don't see anything.
Oh, it's black.
Okay, let me try one more thing. Okay, sorry, let's try this. Is that better?
Nope.
No? Huh.
If not, just walk us through it.
Okay. I'll email this to Charles and you can distribute it. But sorry about that. Let's see. Yeah, so our coalition has been around for the past 10 years. I'll provide you some information kind of over email about our membership, but you can also visit us on our website at slehcra.org, and the Community Reinvestment Act is a law that was really intended to address redlining. So CREA and other community groups have used the CRA and fair lending laws to really make sure that banks are investing, providing services to the communities that have been historically disinvested from in St. Louis. So we kind of continue to see redlining patterns. We continue to have issues with banks not being located in low-income communities and communities of color, and not providing the same level of home loans, small business lending, community development lending and investments in some of those communities that have been historically disinvested. So the CRA is one federal law that's intended to overcome that, to really make sure that banks are proactively serving those communities. And the fair lending laws also kind of work hand in hand, where they're intended to make sure that banks are not discriminating on the basis of race or color, religion, national origin, kind of all of the fair lending laws that require compliance with anti-discrimination and civil rights in the lending and credit needs. So SLECRA, our coalition, what we do is we use these laws like CRA and fair lending to hold banks accountable. And so what the CRA does is the banks are reviewed every couple years by their regulators for how they are meeting the needs of the community. The regulators are the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and the OCC. And there are regular exams, so every 3 to 5 years, banks are reviewed for their performance on lending, services, investments. And then anytime a bank is merging or expanding or acquiring another bank, that they are also reviewed for their CRA performance. And that's where the community groups, community advocates have an opportunity to say how we feel banks are meeting their obligations, how they are providing services to our underserved communities and particularly low and moderate income and communities of color. And so SLECRA does this. We are reviewing banks for their performance. We look at the data. We have conversations. We engage with the banks to ask kind of what they are doing. What are your plans to provide branches, to provide lending services, deposit accounts, kind of how are you meeting the needs of the community? And then working with the regulators to make sure that they are held accountable to that. We also, especially in instances where banks are merging or acquiring another bank, we use that opportunity to come up with what's a proactive plan. How is the bank, as it's growing, as it's expanding, acquiring another bank, how are they proactively meeting the needs of the community and providing benefits specifically to low and moderate income communities and communities of color? And we do that through community benefit agreements, where we have been able to negotiate with banks specific commitments for how a bank, as they have expanded and acquired another bank, to provide loans or services, kind of a lot of different types of commitments that are specific, measurable, kind of have a clear benefit to our community members. So the idea with CRA and kind of our advocacy is that, you know, banks are located in our community. They take deposits of community members. So what are they? What is the return to those deposits? What are the investments that they're doing to promote community revitalization, to promote home ownership and wealth building opportunities for people and communities that have historically been left out of the mainstream financial services? So there's this kind of obligation, this advocacy that that banks are not just taking money out of our communities by taking our deposits, but that they're actually reinvesting and helping to build up communities and build up community assets. And all of our kind of members with CREA are engaging on these different campaigns to get community benefit agreements, to talk about what community needs are. So to make sure that we are bringing up ideas for new products or new types of partnerships that banks can work on, and really kind of create kind of new innovative programs with financial institutions. So all of our members, including CREA, have been able to help talk to banks about those opportunities, the needs, and come up with kind of real solutions. So every year we come out with a report to the community. We do a survey of community members about banking needs, and then do a survey of banks, kind of what has happened over the last year. What have you done to respond to the needs of the community that might be different from previous years? And so I'll talk just a little bit kind of about these findings from 2020, and then we'll have time for questions. So some of the biggest findings that we continue to see, not just in our survey, but many other surveys that come out about kind of community needs and banking needs, are that there still is a need for checking accounts, for savings accounts, to help people use mainstream financial services instead of using predatory lenders, check cashing, kind of higher cost financial institutions. And so a large number of our respondents in our survey responded that they use banks for some of their needs, but not all of it. Some of the biggest reasons why they don't use a bank or a credit union would be they don't feel like they need a bank, or they don't have enough money to keep an account open. So our conversations then with financial institutions are about kind of, well, what kind of checking accounts products do you have? Are they low cost? Are they free? Are they really helping to meet needs of people who are currently using higher cost alternatives, but have a need, kind of want to be able to use a bank or credit union? On the banking kind of responses, some of the biggest things that we've seen over the last couple years is a large amount of commitments in community development, lending, and investments. And these are, you know, in the last year, we reported that there were $765 million in community development loans or investments from banks. And these are things like loans or other investments that go to support affordable housing activities, small business development, helping address revitalization of low and moderate income communities, and other services that help low and moderate income families. So that number is kind of is large. It's a lot of money that's going towards community needs, but there's still a lot of opportunities. We have a lot of banks in our region, and there still are a lot of needs and more kind of opportunities for banks to be financing things that really address our pressing community needs, like affordable housing. So, you know, our advocacy continues to be about how are we engaging with banks and making sure that they are investing and supporting development projects that are targeted to low and moderate income families, that provide affordable housing, that are providing kind of small business loans, especially in minority communities or Black-owned businesses, kind of all of the community needs that we continue to see. Another kind of some of the opportunities that banks talk about that they want to be engaged with are and what they get credit for under the CRA is kind of doing those investments, those community development investments. They also get credit and are looking for opportunities to serve on boards of nonprofits, to teach financial education, to volunteer with organizations that are serving low and moderate income families, and looking for referrals for products and services. So banks kind of get credit, they're looking for opportunities. We're talking to them about ways that they can partner with community organizations to get credit and address the needs of the community through the CRA. One other kind of big area that we've spent a lot of time on the last couple of years is about language access and what banks are doing to meet the needs of limited English proficiency individuals and other foreign-born community members. And so we've worked with banks to create products that accept ITINs, or the individual taxpayer identification number. So if someone doesn't have a social security number, they could still get a bank account, they could still get a home loan, kind of using that ITIN. We've seen some really successful products with a few banks that have created products and also kind of outreach strategies to reach members in our community that use ITINs. In the last year, we've seen 5 lenders add multilingual staff. That Spanish and Bosnian are continue to be the most widely available languages for staff that can speak those languages, as well as materials. But we only have about 5 lenders that reported using printed materials in languages other than English. So I think this is one area that we intend to spend a lot more time on, is really thinking through kind of how banks are reaching our immigrant and foreign-born population. How are they reaching them with products, with outreach, and with materials and strategies that meet those kind of communication needs. The last kind of area that we talk about is bank products. So what products, specifically home loan products, have been targeted to low and moderate income borrowers? We've seen 13 lenders kind of offer some sort of specialized home purchase loan for low and moderate income communities. And so that would be, you know, loans that might have a lower credit score, kind of consider alternative credit, lower down payment requirements. So there's quite a few banks that have really good products that are intended to help address home purchase needs and create opportunities for home ownership. We also see an increasing number of banks offering home improvement loans, and those there, you know, is kind of a scale of them, where there are some banks offering really small dollar loan products, you know, $5,000 loans that are pretty affordable for low and moderate income families, up to kind of larger amounts for more substantial kind of home improvement needs in order to help people maintain their home and stay kind of in their home. But, you know, while we've seen more banks create those kind of products, we still see a huge need and a lot of disparities in terms of who can access those home loans, kind of where those loans are going, and disparities in what types of borrowers along race lines. So for a large majority of our home lending happening in St. Louis region are to white borrowers and to white communities, and that there still are a large number of disparities in who's applying for loans, but also who's getting loans, who's getting approved. There are denial rate disparities between Black borrowers compared to white borrowers when you look at kind of home mortgage. So this is one area that CREA and EHOC, and I know CREA, have a lot of interest in making sure that banks are not discriminating and that they're treating everyone fairly, and really making sure that all communities have access to home mortgage loans, to bank products and services in a way that helps address some of the past historic harms and overcome redlining and promote home ownership and wealth opportunities for all. So there's I'll make sure you all see a map that we have created that shows kind of where home purchase loans have gone in our region compared to the minority population. And there are still there are still striking disparities in red lighting trends that show that there are not loans being made available in communities like North City, North County, and we really need to kind of make sure that we're thinking about and talking about solutions to overcoming that. So with that, I will kind of open it up for questions. I'm happy to talk now, or I'm always available to talk, to follow up later.
Yeah, I have a question. Elizabeth, some of the homes that a person may want to acquire a loan for may need repair. Are insurance companies willing also to work in low income areas to provide the insurance someone might need to get a loan? I mean, even when I purchased my house that I'm currently in the city, it desperately needed a new roof. And the bank didn't want to do a bridge loan because I hadn't sold my other house yet until I put a new roof on the house. I mean, are those things with insurance companies also a problem?
Yeah, that's a great point. We haven't done a lot of work around home insurance companies, but I know that we've heard lots of anecdotes. We've heard people struggling to get affordable home insurance in parts of our community. So I think that's very much part of some of the issue. And yeah, would love to kind of make sure that that's part of our conversation.
Yeah, I think because it's sometimes difficult to get the loans, even a bridge loan, if the house needs repair. And right now they're saying, a lot of the banks are saying the roof has to be less than 20 years old. And that's going to really hamper some people if indeed they're trying to acquire a loan for their home. Just a question. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up.
I have a question for you, Elizabeth, but to follow up on Nancy's comment, a lot of these homes are going owner occupied, FHA. There's a whole bunch of inspection requirements that they want the house just so that you don't buy a place as is, don't have the money to fix it up, can't get occupancy, can't live there, and so forth. One of the things that you may not be tracking, though, also down in Carondelet, Dutchtown, and 63111, 63118, and 63116 now through CCBF, our Carondelet Community Betterment Federation. We have Federal Home Loan Board home repair. It's grant funds, and those are being distributed and work done up to $15,000 per house for owner-occupied properties. But again, it's the cart before the horse. You have to own the property and be living in it to qualify. But that's probably some lending and investment that is not directly tracked, but it's all coming out of Des Moines with a large primary lender instead of these secondary lenders. And what you're getting from a lot of these banks, they're originating mortgages, and it may be to a house in the community, but all they're doing is doing conforming loans, even on some of these special financing that has maybe lower credit score eligibility or lower down payment requirements. They're all conforming to stuff that gets packaged up, that gets resold and then serviced through a mortgage service provider out of town that is out of touch. And I don't know if they're getting credit for it. So that all goes back into my question, as you mentioned, CRA with the Community Reinvestment Act and the credits. Is that program still in place, and are the banks or the lenders being graded specifically on that and required to meet certain minimums and point scores in their lending practices?
Yeah, that's a really good comment. The way the CRA works is the banks are evaluated on a number of different tests. So they, depending on the bank's size, kind of their focus, they are reviewed on their lending to low and moderate income borrowers and low and moderate income communities. And so they are compared to their peers. So they look at kind of what percentage of that bank's loans go to low and moderate income borrowers compared to the peers or the aggregate of lenders, as well as the kind of demographics of the community. There are kind of points associated with that, kind of from the regulator's side of things, that they kind of look at, what level did the bank kind of meet on each of these specific kind of subtests under the larger lending test. And depending on kind of how that works out, they are given a grade kind of on their lending overall, whether it's satisfactory or outstanding or kind of needs to improve. So the metrics that we as community advocates look at to make sure that the banks and the regulators are looking at this correctly, and not kind of inflating things that banks aren't doing, is to look at what those percentages are. So what percentage of the bank's loans are going to low income borrowers compared to the peers? And if it's substantially different, that bank should not be getting a satisfactory rating on their loans, or on their kind of overall CRA performance. So, by and large, a lot of banks are not kind of adequately meeting the credit needs of the community because they are not matching the peers. They're not even matching the kind of our population needs in terms of lending to low and moderate income borrowers.
So the program still does exist, and you still hear a little bit of rhetoric about, oh yeah, we want to reinvest in the community. Yeah, we want to fund that. That's important, but I don't hear them saying, hey, we have to originate some loans. We need to lend some money. We need to open a branch bank in this census tract area. I don't hear that as much anymore as we used to. And maybe because the program's not new, or maybe it's not being enforced. I don't know.
Yeah, I think all of that kind of works together. So banks are, they get credit for on their lending test, but then the investment kind of couples with their giving, their involvement in other community initiatives. They get kind of credit for things like doing the Federal Home Loan Bank and partnering with the federal home loan and agencies to provide home improvement dollars, kind of other grants or investments that go to community development initiatives. They all kind of still get credit for that, and that's factored into their overall CRA kind of rating. Lending is still the highest weighted category. And if you go back to the original passage of the Community Reinvestment Act, it's really about how are banks meeting the credit needs of the community. So that's where I think lending should be the most important thing. The way our society is designed right now, lending is the way to access wealth through through home ownership, through small business. All of those mechanisms are ways to build wealth and build assets. And if banks aren't providing those opportunities or access to credit, then they are failing to meet their CRA obligation.
Elizabeth, I'm wondering if you could speak to what you've seen in terms of the difference between investing in individuals and investing in communities. In other words, if, say, an African-American person wants to move into an area that is not predominantly African-American, as opposed to moving into an area that is predominantly African-American. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that a lot of banks and the kind of CRA advocates are talking about now. With the new administration, there's efforts to reform CRA, and that's one particular component of this conversation about what does need to happen, what's more important in investing and providing access to loans for kind of individuals that might be low or moderate income, or a person of color, or kind of those communities. And I think right now it's kind of equal weight. So a bank would get credit for, providing, or they're evaluated on how they're providing loans to individuals and also communities. And they define that kind of in census tracts and look at the kind of demographics of the census tract. I think all of it is important. I think, it still is balancing kind of in how we are investing in individuals and providing opportunities for mobility while also revitalizing kind of communities and neighborhoods. So I think all of it is important. I think investing in, personally, I think investing in individuals is a one kind of more impactful way to provide access to wealth and asset building opportunities.
Elizabeth, early on, you mentioned a term that I want to bring back because if anybody's been following the news, I would assume whoever wins the mayoral election will be bringing this concept to the fore, and that is the community benefits agreement. So talk a little bit about how community benefit agreements are structured and their role in the relationship with financial institutions.
Yeah, so CREA has a history of working with CBAs or community benefit agreements, specifically when banks are merging or they're buying kind of another bank, that we ask for banks to make a commitment, a forward-looking commitment that says how they're going to meet the needs of the community. So everything kind of with the CRA, the reviews are kind of backward-looking. So we can look at what a bank has done kind of based on their data. What we want to know and what we really want assurance on is that going forward with this new, bigger institution, more resources, more money, taking more money from our community as deposits, we want to know kind of what commitments they're giving back or providing to the public, specifically low and moderate income communities. And so we've been able to negotiate a number of community benefit agreements with banks as most often as part of a merger process. And so we have worked with Simmons Bank when they acquired Reliance Bank and Trust, most recently to negotiate a CBA that provided specific commitments for how Simmons, as the new institution, would be continuing and expanding the work of community development and community reinvestment. So they committed to opening one branch in a community of color, a low income or a community of color. They committed to certain lending kind of goals, to investing in small business initiatives, to investing in their personnel that's focused on community development and community reinvestment, kind of a number of different specific commitments or terms that are part of that agreement. And so we've had success with CBAs kind of locally with some of the regional banks that have been expanding or merging. There's also been a lot of national CBAs that the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, or NCRC, has also been able to negotiate. So currently PNC is one that is acquiring a large bank, BBVA, and so NCRC and us here in St. Louis have been part of that conversation about how PNC specifically has an obligation to come up with a community benefit agreement that really details out how they're going to continue and expand as they've become a bigger institution.
Thank you. Are there any other questions people have?
Well, let me jump in for a minute. We know that the trend in banks is to do away with branches, to reduce the number of branches and to move in an electronic direction. And so I'm wondering, one, how viable it is to say that you'll set up a branch because it might disappear shortly after that. And secondly, I guess I'm trying to figure out really when you have these banks that become distant and don't have interactions with customers, is there any mechanism to try to make the people involved more attuned to what the CRA goals are? I know in a lot of work that I do, people will give you a lot of happy messages about how they're trying to do the right thing, and then you go home and you don't get a signature on what you ought to get a signature on. And how do we approach that?
Yeah, great question. So the first about branches, I think that's a big point of discussion right now, kind of what is the future of bank branches? A lot of our coalition members, our opinion is there is still a need for physical bank branches. That yes, a lot of things are moving online, kind of technology has been able to open a lot of doors for communities that have not had access to banks. But there are still people that want to go to a bank branch. They want to talk to someone in person. They want to kind of see that physical commitment to that community. And so I think we still are emphasizing the importance of bank branches. They're not maybe the branches of past that are huge, kind of big, 2-story buildings with big lobbies, but thinking differently about how branches could be co-located with other organizations or community institutions. We have some really great innovative examples of that here in St. Louis, like the Midwest Bank Center that's located up on MLK with Friendly Temple is a great example of how they were able to be innovative and apply a physical bank presence in a kind of a different way. So I think it's going to be really interesting to kind of continue to talk about the importance of branches and how it's kind of changed in recent years and going forward. And then your second question about kind of, well, how do we address how do we really hold feet to the fire? And that is always an issue. The powerful thing about CRA is that it gives us some of those opportunities. So when a bank is up for evaluation, we write public comment letters to the regulators that say kind of what they have or have not done. Those comment letters are somewhat powerful tools in that it's bringing the attention of the regulators like the Federal Reserve or the FDIC to look more closely at a bank. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of years since we've started doing this work and writing comment letters, kind of engaging with banks, is that the regulators have started to pay attention. So that's kind of one tool of like participating and commenting in this process is one. The specifically with mergers and acquisitions, if we write a comment letter, we protest the merger. If we don't think that a bank is going to fulfill their commitment, we can kind of protest the merger. And we've been able to kind of delay a merger in order to get a community benefit agreement that really kind of helps kind of meet our needs. And so there are some of those kind of tools that have been able to really kind of get to the impact of what is needed. On the fair lending side, I mean, the tools are the same that CREA and kind of you all use to hold other people accountable. So we have filed fair lending complaints against banks with HUD and the Department of Justice. And if there is kind of evidence of discrimination on the basis of race or any other protected class with mortgage lending or with banking services, then those are our kind of enforcement mechanisms that we use. So there are some kind of those opportunities or some tools. Part of what CRA reform is about now, how we're modernizing CRA, the law hasn't changed much since 1977, even though banking has changed tremendously. One of the components of reforming the CRA is about kind of how we're more effectively using it because it hasn't kind of typically been used effectively in the past.
And then I would ask one more question, and that is that a lot of attention is paid to traditional areas of discrimination, race, sex, and so forth. But what role does your work include people with disabilities, both in housing and in small businesses?
Yeah, that's a great point too. I think, SLCREA, our advocacy has kind of focused on the Community Reinvestment Act, which really has low and moderate income communities at the heart, also communities of color. But I think people with disabilities are also not historically served by financial institutions the same level. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to continue to expand that perspective in our advocacy with banks about how they're providing, how they're complying with ADA for one, and then also the fair lending kind of laws.
Right. I mean, but I mean, first of all, a very large proportion of the disabled population is poor. So in one sense that is addressed, but in another sense, there's very little accessible housing in the city of St. Louis. And how do we, can we use these mechanisms to have banks focus on that subgroup in a way to begin to resolve that question? In my job, I'm always getting the question of, is there any sources of money to build a ramp now that so-and-so has had a stroke and needs to use a wheelchair? What do we do about that? And we don't have much in the way of sources of money for that, but we could sure use a hand from some of our banks.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the home improvement, kind of all of the home improvement grants, the financing that banks make available could definitely be part of that. So that's a great suggestion.
Anyone else? That was loud. Anyone else? Elizabeth, I want to thank you. If you'd send me all the stuff that you were going to display with technical difficulties, I'll make sure we get it out to all of the commission members.
I will. Thank you so much all for your time, and I will apologize for the technical difficulties, but I'll make sure that you see those slides. Thanks.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else unless, yeah, I don't have anything else unless anyone, other commission members have any questions or thoughts or anything else.
Charles, I don't want to prolong the meeting, but perhaps adding another commissioner who is a banker, lender, a finance person, but maybe one of you guys are that I don't know, but that seems beneficial, as most every other not-for-profit board or commission always seems to have a banker on it. And certainly they get some CRA credits for being an appointed commissioner here. So maybe that's worth considering.
We had David Noble on the board, and we haven't replaced him. Certainly, I'm going to wait till.
And
Charles, you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, in David's place, could we make a pitch to Orvin Kimbrough?
Yeah, well, good. I know Orvin. I've known him for a long time.
I mean, it's the same bank. It was the same banking organization that David originally came from.
Yeah, yeah. I can reach out. Well, here, I won't do anything until after the election. Then after that, I'll ask the new mayor what, which I can actually say her. I'll ask the new mayor what she would like to do in terms of, because here's the issue, and I'll say this. Elizabeth and I have had this conversation. The city uses the same resources that Elizabeth and CREA may be involved with on the CRA side. So there becomes a little bit of tension between those two concepts. So I want to make sure that the new mayor knows about CREA, which I would assume they do, and what our role would be in that process. So give it a little time, but yeah, I would love to have a banker or somebody in financial institutions on our board. Anybody or anything else? Our next meeting is scheduled for May 5th. And you know that you'll be getting out. You know what? I'm going to ask Kevin McKinney if SLACO has anything that is coming up that they're doing.
Thanks, Charles. Our next big thing that we're working on is the 29th of March. We hope to have another youth-centric debate between the two candidates that are running for mayor. So that will be the 29th. And we're also getting real involved with Emily Andrews and the Green Building Efficiency Initiative. And they're having a open house via Zoom on March 25th. And I'll send out some information to everybody.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone else for the good of the order? All right. Be safe, be masked up. I don't know if we have any extra masks, but if you all need one, we'll get you a CREA one. Elizabeth, we'll get you a CREA mask. If not, I want to thank everybody for being here today and greatly appreciate it. Wait.
Lisa, I will get your mask.
Hold on.
Okay.
Carol's gotta-
Is Carol trying to say something?
I am. I only want to say I apologize for running. I apologize for running a little bit late in joining the meeting. Obviously, a really good meeting. Take care of your mental health, folks. You do
Thank
not
you.
want to be in the position
Thank you, guys.
that a couple of my clients are in this morning. I had to go to the hospital to help them not have to be in the hospital right now. Take care of your mental health.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
sweetheart. Dale, feel better.
Thank you.